So let's talk about it, Australia Day. So I feel like with the impacts of COVID, what we've been seeing in our society as a result of this pandemic, the real fractures, those real elements or those components of our society that our nation largely likes to ignore have come to the forefront. I was living in Western Sydney, an area that was largely or greatly impacted by the restrictions that were placed or rather implemented by our government. And we saw these discriminatory pieces or forms of legislation where other areas in Sydney were not required to fulfill these requirements. And what that really speaks to is the racial discrimination, the capitalistic approach to various demographics and communities, and the ways that this government uses it as justification. It was horrific what we dealt with. There has been no exploration of impacts on mental health. There's been no exploration of impacts on families, or even, economically, how are families coping with the impacts of this pandemic? And we're coming up to Australia Day. So what we need to do as a society is really reflect on what's happening on the ground and pull away from the false narrative that's being provided to us from our government. You're going to celebrate Australia Day this year. What are you really celebrating? There have been 500 black deaths in custody since 1993. I have a sister who was born in that year. The fact that we're seeing this, the fact that this is still persuading so many years later is an indicator that something is really wrong in this country. And this number, 500, should be a red flag. It should be a signal that this country needs change. But what do we continuously see year after year? A glazing over of this. And that is what Australia Day represents for countless First Nations people. A distraction, something to look forward to, celebrating this false sense of identity in this country that we have never been afforded the opportunity to partake in and participate in. What it means to be Australian has always been put in opposition to First Nations people. And that in itself should be a reason why this day is not only changed, this date should not just be changed, this date should be abolished. We're seeing more domestic violence in this country than what we've ever seen before. We're seeing higher numbers of homelessness. More children are becoming disengaged with their education system. The issues in this country are really impacting marginalized and vulnerable demographics. There is an elitism in this country where specific groups and collectives, again, are higher up, and there are other lower classes. And these lower classes in the country are really feeling the impacts of this pandemic, but also are largely left out of this Australian or this false sensehood of what it means to be Australian. I am constantly engaging with the ways that I have been marginalized, but I'm calling for my audience as well to reflect on the ways they may be privileged, but they also may be disadvantaged, because it's within that homework and that self-reflection, it's within engaging with these topics and these discussions internally, that's where change can really generate. Our society has taught us change is external, change has to be seen, it has to be almost held within our hands. But the biggest and the most important change is going to happen within yourself, within your family and your own community. And what's happening this year with Australia Day just looming around the corner, this pandemic has to be a reason for change. 500 black deaths in this country has to be a reason for this day to no longer exist. We should not be celebrating Australia Day or Australia until all of us can participate in this celebration. We should not be celebrating, have a day of celebration until vulnerable and marginalized collectives are not continuously falling off the graph, until the poorer and continuously keep getting poorer in this country, until the richer keep getting richer. We're destroying the environment. Our economy is so unstable people, if it's looking at, education, if it's looking at the experiences of other racial or religious minorities in this country, where we're constantly reminded that we do not belong. There are certain suburbs, certain area codes where we know we cannot go. There are certain areas and suburbs we won't leave. This is not how this country should have been created, and this is a call for change in this country. This pandemic has removed a lot of the fake facade around our country, around our society, and now it's the time that we really engage together, reflect what is happening over the last 12 months and why we should not be celebrating this specific date in recognition of First Nations people, but also recognizing the problematic nature of what it means to be Australian, let alone to celebrate it.